This podcast is brought to you by Mapper Forward's new Patreon community, the Global Coffee Think Tank. Check the show notes or head to patreon.com/Mapper to find out how you can become a member today. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Mapper Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and today I am thrilled about the series that we are starting today. Today we welcome Werner Thie to the podcast for the first time. Welcome, Werner.
Welcome all.
So Werner and I happened upon each other this year, thanks to a dear friend of mine, Madeline, who has been on the podcast a number of times. And Werner is a part of PCR. He is one of the founding owners of PCR, which is based in Hawaii. And in this series, we are talking about how Werner's life evolved once he started growing coffee. And basically the theme is what I learnt about life growing coffee. Werner refuses to use the word coffee producer. Werner is a coffee grower in Hawaii and has lived one of the most interesting kind of existences that I've had the privilege of getting to know over this year. Werner, you and I have known each other a short time, but it feels like we've known each other quite a long time. We've had some great conversations. And over this series, I humbly cherish that this podcast documents the history of people of our industry, essentially. And for me, this is a really wonderful opportunity for us to be able to look at, look at the life, the difference in the trajectory that your life took, being someone who now grows coffee, and perhaps not for mass production and not for sale, but you do grow coffee. And so I was wondering if you could introduce yourself and tell people who you are and what you do, and then we're going to have a bit of a chat about how life has changed for you being a coffee grower over the past 15-ish years.
Sure. Yes, my name seems to be the destination, and the shoes we just mentioned that. Yes, I had to fill these shoes which come with my name. Not going into details with that, I lived a very full life. I'm 67 years old. I lived a very full life in the tech and software industry, which was, of course, being 67 now, I almost have 45 years of experience and being dunked in almost all problems that industry ever generated. I stayed in it. I'm still in it, and I'm still feel unharmed by the developments, but I see a lot of bad stuff happening in the software industry, as well as Lee is one of the foreboding key persons which yes, also describe the dark side of the industries. At around 2000, my wife and I decided that it was time to conclude at least a part of our life and have a third half of our life in a more agricultural and more to the earth approach. With Switzerland being extremely space limited, there was absolutely no way to become agricultural on a level we desired in a country which is say above the 40th degree of latitude. Winters are harsh. There is very limited acreage, and the acreage is so expensive that we didn't have enough saved money not wanting to get into the financial system for being financed. Our style was always to own what we own, to pay what we need to pay for, and never become indebted just for not touching the financing system and the gambling place called stock market.
Mm-hmm.
So we took out almost all reserves we had built up in our tech lives. My wife being a lab technician and very familiar with the chemical medical side of things. And we started out to look for places, and knowing that there is this marvel and this diamond in the Pacific, we headed to Hawaii. Hawaii always being on my mind for being the most precious astronomical site on the northern hemisphere.
Mm-hmm.
So initially I had the plan of studying astronomy, but financial situation of my family in the 70s didn't allow me to study astronomy. So I promised at that time, I promised me at 50. So my wife took me up on this and said, why have you never been to Hawaii? Having that grand statement, I will study astronomy at 50. So, and doing this in Hawaii. So I said, okay, let's fly to Hawaii. We flew here. We experienced the oily charm of Waikiki, and we fled that place after 48 hours.
Oh.
Going to Big Island. Sorry. And finding that this place was much more suitable, but it was also very black. So, you really have to adjust your eyes to
so it was very dark?
Blackness. No, it's not. Yeah, everything is black here because we live on lava flows.
So the earth is black.
The earth is black, the rock is black, everything is black. So, yes, we are used to live with a lot of different shades of black. Mm-hmm. And with a lot of rocks, by the way, also. So, we flew here, and we also had to fly back pretty fast because there was a lot of work waiting. So, yes, flying back and looking out of the plane's window, we saw a tiny speck or specks of light up at the flanks of Hualalai. And we said, man, this place must have an absolutely beautiful view of the coast. Mm-hmm. We need to check this out the next time we come. It didn't take us more than 6 months to come back. And then coming back from Mauna Kea, the astronomical site and the mountain which is in all the controversies on this island between the islanders, the natives, and the usurpers, the Americans. We came back from Mauna Kea and we guesstimated that we have hit the right spot. Mm-hmm. We stopped the car, did a right, and then we stood in awe. I would say, yes, that was absolutely awesome. The view from where we stopped the car and looking down on the coast, sitting at 1,500 feet, and we looked at each other and said, if there is a place to die on this planet, then we want to die here. And
nice.
with that, we explored, and this place looked really like they were selling land. So we basically, in this 2-week holiday, we decided to buy 3 acres of land, not knowing what this was getting us into, but because the land we bought was relatively expensive. That was one thing, but the other thing was we couldn't even walk on that land. So
wow.
Yes, it was so overgrown. It was such a thick. It was such a jungle. And yes, so we bought that land right on the spot, and then flying home, now knowing that we had 3 acres of land in Hawaii.
And a task ahead of you that was going to be huge.
Yes, which was basically absolutely, yes, devastatingly big. So it would. I imagine that this would consume the time we still have to spend on that planet. That this would consume this time, no problem. And so we had to let it sit for quite at some time. Sorry, but in 2005 we actually started to terraform, and that's one thing people do not really understand, on which are not living on volcanic mountains, which are still active. So the terraforming consists of breaking up the top layer of lava, because lava flows underneath and on top of the soil.
Mm-hmm.
So meaning if you are able to break up that crust, there's a lot of good soil being buried within, being sandwiched in between lava layers. And so we did the terraforming, which involves 100-ton machines and really, really good drivers who are able to navigate the terrain and actually carve out whatever was needed, which was basically a path for the house, and then some trenches for utilities. And so we did all that. And then having a bit of land which was basically terraformed but had nothing on it, going back home, waiting 4 years, coming back, and that thing was overgrown as thick as it was in the beginning.
Wow.
So yes, then clearing at least the pad and starting to build, and then building in existence here without knowing or still not knowing what we were getting ourselves into. So we developed quite an appetite for knowledge in terms of how to cope with all that problematic weeds and stuff. So there was, of course, coming from the tech industry, we were not actually biologists, and we are not actually fluent in whatever language is used in scientific terms about plants and nomenclatures, soil compositions and whatnot. So we after 2009, then we had a home. So I started to oscillate between Switzerland and Hawaii on 3 months terms, being a tourist and being questioned every time I came into Hawaii. with questions like, "You just left. When do you come back?"
Well, I love Hawaii. What can I say?
Yes, me answering, "Man,
Me.
Hawaii is so beautiful."
Uh, I mean,
So we,
for some context for people who who don't know where this story is going, the people I haven't been on your farm. The people who I have spoken to who have been on your farm envy this farm and call it the most pristine farm they have ever seen in their lives. So we're at a part of the story where you're talking about, in 3 months bursts coming and like clearing paths and building houses and doing all of that kind of stuff, to the point where we fast forward to today, and this is one of the most enviable farms on the big island of Hawaii. You'll never admit that, but I can say that. But really, that's how people talk about the farm. And I'm not just talking about your business partners who, Madeline and Britt obviously say that, but there are other people who talk about what you and Beatrice have built and said it is like beyond pristine. So you grow coffee you grow coffee like as well, folks. You have to understand Hawaii is a few years deep into coffee leaf rust infestation, and we're going to cover all of this in this series. But there have been some serious challenges that the Hawaii coffee producing community has faced, and you as an engineer, you and Beatrice have approached these kinds of perspectives in perhaps from a different perspective of the way that other people have approached these kinds of things, would you say?
Yes, we say we don't like the chemical baseball bat approach coffee growers usually use in terms of fighting whatever ails them.
Mm-hmm.
So coming to coffee, and I still have to tack this on to the previous explanation of how we came to Hawaii. We came into coffee. Of course, this is coffee land. This is the coffee belt. This is 35 miles of coffee land. And there is farm after farm. We have about 750 farmers here working on farms with 60,000 trees down to farms as ours with 250 trees. But we came into coffee and we were blessed with coffee by our neighbor who gave me 15 fledgling trees about half a foot high and in pots, and he told me, you need to plant them. That was 24 hours before I had to get onto the plane. So
wow.
I frantically ran down to Home Depot, bought irrigation and timers and whatnot, and planted those 15 trees, and amazingly, they all survived.
Wow.
So that was that was the idea of, and our intro into coffee. And from then on, it was like, now we have to study this in more detail. And of course, what do you do with 15 coffee trees? This is like a handful of coffee. So, and one of the key things I used to dig into coffee and coffee knowledge was the absolutely marvelous book written by Windgen. So he has written the Coffee Bible, which is I don't know, a collection of articles of about 1,000 pages of coffee knowledge, going from transportation, going to coffee futures, ranging over ailments, coffee grading, whatnot. So yes, we studied that stuff in depth, and then we started to build that processing chain, because that was also the interesting part to elaborate on and dabble in the processing of coffee, which is, in my opinion, still a very satisfying process and process steps which you can where you can influence the type of coffee you produce in a deep way. So yes, that's the coffee part.
And that's how you
also
got...
do on a...
Go ahead.
And that's what we do in coffee, but what we also cherish is growing whatever tropical fruits can be grown on this island, and that this is what actually is where the farm is heading to, is to become a food forest, which starts to protect the lower layers with a protective canopy of bigger trees, allowing us then to grow other stuff underneath. One combination could be breadfruit, and having underneath cacao. So exploiting these ideas is next on the burner, and it might take another 10 to 20 years for the trees to grow actually big enough to be
harvest?
Protective. Yeah, to harvest. No, they fruit much earlier, but just to have that size and that strength of the canopy to block sunlight to a point where
they provide shade.
Provide the shade, and also allow you to use plants which are prone to lose a lot of water in tropical environments, because water scarcity is, of course, the main thing we will experience whenever we have an energy shortage.
Yep.
Because water needs to be pumped, and living at higher altitude might make you tsunami safe. But
you'll die of thirst in the process.
Negative impact of pumping up the water.
Trust me to take it straight to you're going to die of thirst. It's not like there's a problem to solve. Nope, we're going to die. That's exactly where that's going. So, yes. So you come to Hawaii. It's a dream. You decide you're going to move to Hawaii. There are a bunch of challenges to actually get to the point where you can have a home and start exploring the kinds of things that you want to explore. And then in the next episode, we're going to talk about what going through that process and what growing coffee, as well as the other agricultural products that you've got on your land, what it's taught you about being a human. Because that's the real gold that in this story, and a lot of why I wanted to have you on the podcast, because you're not a commercial coffee producer. You grow coffee, but your story is quite unique in the fact that you're an engineer, you're a problem solver, and what your land is providing is really kind of a blueprint of a future way of living.
Yes.
So let's talk about that in the next episode, shall we?
Yes.
Perfect. Peace, love, and peanut butter, everybody. Have an amazing rest of your day. Thanks, friends. If you enjoyed this video, here's what you should check out next. Consider supporting Map It Forward on Patreon, and be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell before you leave.